Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in time and space. This is the weekly intuitive update. It is a special edition because this week we are talking about Gemini. I know we're still in Taurus season. It's May 13th today when I'm recording this. So we have another 9 days of being in Taurus season. But, I'm feeling some urgency around talking about Gemini for a couple of reasons. The North, I mentioned this briefly in last week's intuitive update. The North and the South node have transited. They're moved into a new sign. New signs, they are in Gemini and Sagittarius. North node is in Gemini, South node is in Sagittarius. And then we are also starting Venus retrograde. Venus went retrograde. Venus went rogue, went retrograde yesterday, May 12th. And it will be retrograde for the next 39 days. And Venus will be in Gemini until August 7th, which is a long ass time. Okay. So we've got some big things happening, in Gemini, and I felt it was important for me to start talking about it now, because the energies have already begun. So yeah, if you have worked with me on a one-on-one basis, you have heard me talk about the lunar nodes because that is an important aspect of the chart that I like to look at when I'm working with clients. But if you are not familiar with the lunar nodes, they are really important points. They are not actually objects in the sky, but they are 2 points at which the orbit of the moon intersects the ecliptic. We have our north node and we have the south node. So the north node is concerned with our destiny. What are we moving towards in this lifetime? The south node relates to the things how we reckon with the past, like what we're learning to release, what we're learning to heal, and what gifts and skills and knowledge that we're bringing into this lifetime. So the lunar nodes are often called the nodes of destiny because they relate to karma. They relate to why we're here and what we're choosing to work with. That's how it works, in the natal chart. And then, of course, like during transits, they affect all of us collectively in different ways. They light up different aspects of our natal chart as well. So yeah, the north node, their orbits are, they last about a year and a half. It's a year and a half long orbit. They're always on a polarity. They exist on a polarity always. So the north node and the south node are always in exact opposition to each other. They also, their transits are always retrograde as well. They are always retrograde. So the north node was in Cancer, the south node was in Capricorn, which is also part of like why we had so many like huge eclipses in those signs over the last year and a half. That's part of the reason why it was such a big deal with like Saturn and Pluto being conjunct, because I was right near the south node as well earlier this year. And so now those objects moving retrograde, they're not objects either. They're points. The lunar points are moving retrograde, and now the north node is in Gemini, and the south node is in Sagittarius. Okay. And so when we're talking about the lunar nodes, we are really talking about like our evolution and our growth in some way. And of course, how the lunar nodes will affect each of us personally is dependent on the placement of Gemini and Sagittarius in our natal charts. And so that would require, a one-to-one reading for more personal insights. But generally speaking, what we're dealing with Gemini, Sagittarius, lunar nodes, we're talking about releasing dogma, which is Sagittarius South Node, and introducing curiosity, which is Gemini North Node. And so let's think back briefly to when the lunar nodes were in Cancer and Capricorn. Think about what you experienced over the last year and a half. So we know, so in astrology, Capricorn is like the sign of like seriousness, ambition, work, public recognition. It's about power. It's about control. It's ruled by Saturn, so there's some karmic stuff in there. Like I said, control is a big thing. Cancer is, exists on a polarity. It's in opposition with Capricorn. So Cancer is associated with the home, with our feelings, with how we nurture ourselves, with how we feed ourselves. It's very much concerned with our emotional selves, coziness. And Capricorn's like, I'm gonna put my shit out there. I'm gonna like be the best. I'm gonna win. And Cancer's like, well, why don't we just like bake some cookies and just like kind of see how we feel about things. Cancer is very much concerned with care, and Capricorn is much more concerned with control. C. And so with that, the thing about like how that has been amplified or intensified in your life over the last year and a half, there's a really obvious example of how that has changed all of our lives, and that's COVID. That's the novel coronavirus. Really fundamentally, it came along and has fundamentally changed the way we think about work and how we think about home. We are going to remember life. People who were born during this time, we're going to remember life as time before COVID and time after COVID. So the nodes of destiny, they lit up our relationship with how we value our labor and with how we nurture ourselves. So yeah, that's one example of how the nodes of destiny can play out. And it's just like a really obvious example of the interplay between the polarities that can lead to some explosive results, potentially. So with Gemini and Sagittarius in the mix, Gemini and Sagittarius are both like concerned with the nature of knowledge. They're both concerned with learning, and meeting people but in different ways. So Gemini is really into learning a little bit about everything, like bringing a real curiosity to their perspective. There's an openness to Gemini, and it's like kind of like it's Gemini is about building like a cozy and like kind of close community. It's really concerned with its neighbor, like your brother, your sister, the people who are close to you. And Gemini is not necessarily like in it for like the long haul or like deep research, but the little bit that they got, they can really parrot it back to you very well, and it make you feel like they've known this shit all their life and like they're the experts. Sagittarius, on the other hand, Sagittarius is really interested in like deep philosophical, higher education, deepening like your knowledge, like really diving in and like coming out knowing everything about a particular subject, knowing one subject really well, for example, which is like, again, different from Gemini, which is like able to connect to many different sources and synthesize ideas and knowledge from that. And Sagittarius is like, I'm about to like read this entire encyclopedia on this one specific subject. And that is going to be the barometer for my wisdom and understanding of the world. Sagittarius is also, they both they have their similarities, of course, too, right? They are both kind of associated with a kind of flightiness. And Sagittarius, a stereotype with Sagittarius is oh, they are quick to pack up their bags and fly off somewhere, go off on an adventure and travel, go to foreign lands. So Gemini is interested in the neighbor and immediate community. Sagittarius is associated with overseas travel, long distance travel. And so again, you can kind of see how they're similarities, and you can see how they're similar, and you can see how polarities work. Polarities are not just about extreme opposites. Well, they are. They are about opposites, but it also, I think, it reveals the ways in which opposites, there is a balance in opposites, and there is ultimately a center where the two meet. And that center where the two meet with Gemini and Sagittarius is knowledge, truth. What is it? What is it for? What purpose does it have? Are we going to apply it for something that is long lasting, or are we going to apply it for something that is a little bit more casual, but perhaps just as rich? So with all of this stuff, that is where we kind of get into the idea of how we need to release dogma right now. So if Sagittarius is very much there's one way that things are. If there's a truth, then just say it. That's how it is. It's a dogmatic kind of way of thinking. It's kind of tyrannical sometimes, low key tyrannical. And Gemini is well, let's just check it out. So with all this stuff too, just remember that, a natal chart is the thing. The natal chart is what really paints a complete picture of a person. And so I'm sprinkling in little tidbits about personality traits associated with these signs, but it doesn't mean that, if you're a Sagittarius, it doesn't mean that you can't be, have a variety of interests. And just because you're a Gemini doesn't mean that you can't be stodgy and very set in your ways. Again, we all know astrology is more complex than that. Just wanted to throw that out there. So to bring us back to the general theme of Gemini and Sagittarius nodes of destiny, right now, again, we're talking about releasing dogma and introducing curiosity. The dogma is represented by Sagittarius because, again, there is that kind of tyrannical relationship to philosophy, really identifying with your philosophical beliefs and seeing them as one truth, the one truth that exists. But instead, we're releasing that kind of energy. We're being invited to release that kind of energy. And the curiosity, we're trying to introduce curiosity, and that's Gemini. Gemini wants to see a little bit of everything that's going on, right? And so think about how dogma is showing up, not just in your life, but in how it's showing up in the collective right now. We are polarized, from an American perspective. In America, there is the gap between our experiences is getting wider and wider and wider. And that is exemplified in the experiences of the wealth inequality. And it also shows up in our political sphere, in our fucking two-party system. And it's showing up in the people who think that COVID is a hoax, and the people who recognize that COVID is a real threat, and an actual virus that exists in this world. Because, by the way, it is, just in case you were concerned about where I stood on that. that's where I am. It's real. So yeah, this stuff is showing up in our world already. It's already been there. And so this next year and a half, those kind of differences, those kind of challenges are going to continue to be amplified. Okay. The polarization of beliefs and ideas is going to become more prominent in our world. And that's a scary prospect in some ways. It is. So what we have to do in this scenario is to continue to align ourselves to our values and our truth and our belief system. This transit is showing us that freedom is not just about one's own truth alone, but ultimately about allowing all to live from their truth. And that's kind of a complicated thing to try to imagine when on just like a 3D level, right? Like, how can there be more than one truth? How does truth work in that way? And so try to see things from like a holographic perspective. The way that things work, like on a level of divinity, on a soul level, separation is not real. Separation is a fallacy, right? And the way that can be true while we still experience physical separation in the world is basically just like imagine all of existence, all that is, like it's a holograph. It's a holograph. And so it might look one way from one place, from one viewpoint, from one perspective, but if you shift and you move around, you can see like another side, another viewpoint, another way of being. So that's what I mean when I talk about us having a holographic perspective in this world. So we're all together. It's all one, but just moving slightly differently, or moving way differently, like going to the other side, looking at it from a different perspective. You see a different viewpoint. So I've talked about this a little bit before, several weeks ago in a weekly intuitive update. It's the one where I also talk about cactus quartz. That's, if you want to go back and revisit that video, I talk a little bit about like how as things continue to evolve and change here on Earth, it's going to be like literally like we're all living in different realities. And it's going to feel literal. It'll be like things will be happening and another person might not be able to see it. They literally might not be able to see it. And that is, again, it's going to feel like we're more separate when that's not really what's happening. It's just like the holographic experience is going to become more pronounced. And so I know that's kind of heady, but I'm saying all that to say that that's why it's so important for you right now to be like clear on your value system, what you care about, who you are, and reflecting that in your thoughts and your intentions and in your actions is how it's going to be really, really important for you to maintain that your connection to your sense of self and your sense of truth, because you want to like consciously choose the reality that you live in. You don't want to be caught in a reality that is created from your subconscious and from your fears. Okay? Does that make sense? And I think that part of the reason why, one of the good things about Venus being in Gemini for so long, Venus being retrograde Venus being retrograde for one, and then Venus being in Gemini for so long, I think that's actually going to help us ease in a little bit to Gemini and like the kind of like intensity that's going to come up with the lunar nodes being in Gemini, the North Node being in Gemini, because Venus as a planet, like it's about our abundance, it's about love, it's about it's like the material manifestation of love. It's a material manifestation of our presence with ourself. It's the material manifestation of like our values ultimately. And so with Venus being retrograde, that gives us for 40 days total, that gives us an opportunity to get clear on our internal belief systems, on doing that work within ourselves, that loving work within ourselves, so that we can bring it out into the world, into the physical world, make that manifest in the physical world. It's really going to be a helpful placement. Excuse me. The North Node and Venus are not conjunct or anything right now, because remember, the motions of the lunar nodes, they are retrograde. So right now, the lunar nodes are in like the 29th degree of Gemini and Sagittarius, while Venus is, let me triple check that. Yeah, the North Node is in the 29th degree of Gemini, and Venus right now is in the 21st degree. So for now, the North Node and Venus are moving in the same direction backwards. Venus won't hit the North Node until like August of this year. So just imagine like Venus is just coming close to the North Node, like kind of seeing it on the horizon and then being like, oh shit, am I ready for this yet? And then just like kind of going back and like checking in, going inward, making sure they're prepared first before facing the North Node, and then come June, once its motion starts going forward again, starts going direct, it will be a little bit more prepared when it actually does come face to face with the North Node in August. So when Venus meets the North Node in Gemini, it'll be the culmination of like a long, intentional journey that required looking back, being present with oneself, having an internal journey before you can step forward again. And that's very reflective of the experience of the North and South nodes as well. We kind of have to look back in order to like look forward and to heal and to move forward with with the destiny that we are facing. So yeah, it's going to feel very, it's going to have a feeling of great import, I think, when this comes up in August, when this meeting comes up in August. So for my next point, I'm just going to quickly reference the Gemini-Sagittarius polarity again. Gemini is about short distance travel, kind of staying closer to home. Sagittarius is about long distance travel, the foreign and the unknown. Think about how that also plays into our current like political systems as well. So any kind of like us versus them kind of energy might also be amplified during this time. And on a related note, another thing that is really huge about at least to me, and this is not, I'm not making any predictions about anything, at least not publicly at the moment. But I think an important thing to note right now as well is that, so you may or may not know that Donald Trump, he is a Gemini. His birthday is June 14th, 1946. And his sun is in 22 degrees of Gemini. And on election day of this year, the presidential election day, November 3rd, 2020, the North Node will be, I had it pulled up in front of me. Give me 2 seconds. The North Node will be in 21 degrees of Gemini. So that means that the North Node and Trump's sun are going to be conjunct on election day. Like I said, I'm not making any predictions publicly at this moment in time about that. And predictions aren't really my thing, as y'all know anyway. But I think that is something to keep in mind when we're thinking about like the nature of our political systems potentially shifting, changing, solidifying, continuing in a direction that perhaps not all of us will be totally on board with. That's my really neutral way of talking about what might be coming up in November. So yeah, that is kind of like general information on this stuff. So medicine, ways to move forward during this time. Yeah, really prioritize a healthy connection with your intellect. Prioritize creating intimacy with your thoughts and not fighting your moodiness, any moodiness that might come up. Not fighting malleability and curiosity. You might find yourself kind of like a little bit more all over the place than usual. And that can manifest itself in like agitation and anxiety and irritability as well. But it also might just manifest itself as like it being harder for you to have like a sustained, long kind of attention on things, which is not a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It's just part of that kind of freeness, looseness, adaptability of Gemini. You might feel that it might be even more pronounced in terms of like your money issues, your love issues. It won't feel like you're on as solid ground as you ordinarily would be if Venus was in a different sign for so long. Like, for example, Venus in Taurus is like very steady. Venus is a ruler of Taurus. Venus rules Taurus. And so it feels very much at home there. It's like amplification of the manifestation of like beauty and having your needs met. Venus in Gemini is a little bit more complicated, a little bit more thought-based. There's a lot more adaptability, a lot of malleability. There's a lot of again, curiosity. You might not feel as like kind of solid or stable in where your attention goes in terms of things like romance, in terms of like how you deal with your money and finances. And so you'll just want to bring, again, curiosity, like lean into the curiosity, lean into your ability to like shift and change and be receptive, like allow yourself to be receptive and to not judge yourself for a changing kind of attention span. Because yeah, there's a lot of intense energy that's going to be focused on Gemini for the next several months, and then again for the next year and a half. So yeah, this is kind of a long transmission, but that is what I have for you for today. Please let me know if you have any questions, any thoughts, and if you want to learn more about how Venus retrograde affects you, or about how the transit of the lunar nodes affect you, please book a reading with me. I'd be happy to dive into this stuff with you. So thank you for listening. Take care.